The ink had barely dried. I remember the weight of the pen in my hand. Heavy, somehow, the way ordinary objects become unbearable when you're using them to end something. My lawyer, a narrow man named Gerald who smelled perpetually of cinnamon gum, slid the final page across the conference table with the practiced ease of someone who had watched countless marriages dissolve into paperwork. He said something reassuring, the kind of words people say when they don't know what else to offer. I nodded. I pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line, Clayton Stokes, 4 years. Gone in the scratch of a ballpoint. Outside, the city moved the way it always does. Indifferent, relentless, full of people who had no idea that inside this beige-walled office on the 14th floor, a version of my life was being officially retired. I shook Gerald's hand. I took the elevator down. I walked out onto the street, and the afternoon hit me like something physical, bright and loud and entirely too alive for how hollow I felt. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look at it immediately. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching a pigeon investigate a pretzel wrapper, and I thought, this is what after feels like. This specific quality of emptiness. Not painful exactly, not peaceful either, just vast. Then I looked at my phone. The message was from my doctor's office. A reminder about the results of a blood panel I'd had done the week before. A routine checkup that my physician had been hounding me about for 2 years. I had gone mostly to get her off my back. I had sat in the papery gown and let them take their vials and thought of nothing in particular. The message said, "Please call our office at your earliest convenience to discuss your results." I called. The nurse who answered had a calm, careful voice. She asked me to verify my date of birth. She pulled up my file. She said something that I had to ask her to repeat, because I was standing on a sidewalk in the middle of the city, having just signed my divorce papers, and surely I had misheard her. I had not misheard her. I stood very still for a long time after I hung up. The pigeon had moved on. The pretzel wrapper skittered past my shoe in a gust of wind. Somewhere nearby, someone was laughing. A full, bright, unself-conscious laugh that seemed to belong to a different universe than the one I was currently inhabiting. I was pregnant. 4 years ago, when I had married Derek Hollis, with his easy smile and his inability to take anything seriously, including our marriage, I had done something that at the time felt like the most romantic gesture imaginable. I had agreed to carry. I had wanted to. I had imagined it, a family, a house full of noise, someone to hand things down to. Derek and I had discussed it earnestly in those early months. The way new couples discuss everything earnestly, as though the force of their intention is enough to shape the future. We had tried twice. Both times, it hadn't taken. Derek had been sympathetic in a distracted way, which was his mode for most things. I had grieved quietly. We had moved on. Then Derek had an affair. Then another. Then we stopped pretending that we were going to fix it. And now here I was, 3 months after I had stopped all medical intervention, 6 weeks after the last time Derek and I had even been in the same room, standing on a public sidewalk with divorce papers in my bag and a positive pregnancy result in my ears. The math was not ambiguous. The timing was not mysterious. And Derek, who had already moved in with the second affair, was the biological father. I bought a bottle of sparkling water from a cart on the corner. I sat down on a bench. I drank half of it in one long pull and stared at nothing and tried to locate, somewhere inside myself, the appropriate emotion for this moment. What I found, after a few minutes of searching, was something that felt almost like laughter. Bitter, yes. Exhausted, absolutely. But there was something so exquisitely absurd about the situation. The timing so precise, it was almost architectural. That my body didn't quite know whether to cry or to laugh. And so I did a peculiar combination of both quietly enough that nobody stopped to ask if I was all right. I went home. My apartment was the one I had rented 6 weeks ago when I moved out of the house Derek and I had shared. It was a 3rd-floor walk-up with good light and a radiator that knocked and hissed in a pattern I was slowly learning to find comforting rather than alarming. I had not unpacked everything yet. Boxes were still stacked against the wall of the second bedroom, which I had been calling my studio even though I hadn't painted anything in months. I sat on the floor of that room, back against the boxes, and I looked at the empty wall in front of me. I thought, what now? I thought, I am going to have a baby. I thought, I am 29 years old. I am newly divorced. I am currently employed as a freelance book cover designer, and I am going to have a baby. And then, unexpectedly, underneath all of that, I thought about Vernon. Vernon Buck. I had not thought about Vernon in years. That was a lie. I had thought about him periodically, in the way you think about things that are too complicated to think about directly. Obliquely, in passing, the thought surfacing and then being firmly redirected before it could do any damage. Vernon had been my friend for most of my 20s, my best friend for a while. The kind of friend who exists in your life with such particular rightness that you stop noticing how extraordinary it is until it's gone. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday party. One of those parties in a cramped apartment where everyone is a little too loud because there's nowhere to be quiet, and you end up having real conversations by accident because there's nothing else to do. Vernon had been in the kitchen attempting to fix the blender, and I had watched him for several minutes before he noticed me. Because there was something about the focused patience with which he was approaching the broken appliance that I found immediately interesting. He was tall. He had broad shoulders and big, capable hands. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a look of concentrated determination that broke into a wide, slightly embarrassed smile when he noticed me watching. "It's a lost cause," I told him. "I'm aware," he said, but I committed to the bit. We talked for 4 hours that night. About everything and nothing. The kind of conversation that becomes the benchmark for all subsequent conversations. He was funny in a quiet way, the kind of funny that sneaks up on you. He was thoughtful. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered what you'd said 10 minutes ago and built on it. By the end of the night, I had his number. By the end of the week, we had made plans. By the end of the month, he was my person. The one I called when something happened, the one whose opinion I genuinely wanted, the one who made the ordinary hours feel richer. And underneath all of that, for a long time, something else. Something I got very good at not naming. When I met Derek, Vernon was the first person I introduced him to. I watched Vernon shake Derek's hand and smile and be perfectly gracious, and I thought, good. This is good. This is the right order of things. Vernon had been at our wedding. He had stood in the second row and smiled when I looked at him, and I had smiled back, and that had been that. 18 months into my marriage, Vernon got a job offer in another city. I told him to take it. He took it. We stayed in touch the way people promise to stay in touch, which is to say, at first faithfully, then sporadically, then not at all, until enough time passed that reaching out felt like a significant act requiring significant justification. The last time I had spoken to Vernon Buck was at a mutual friend's funeral almost 2 years ago. We had stood outside the church in the thin spring sunshine and talked for 20 minutes and been careful with each other in a way that felt like the conversation was wrapped in tissue paper. Then we had gone our separate ways, and I had come home to Derek, and that had been that. Sitting on the floor of my not yet unpacked studio, newly divorced, newly pregnant, I thought about Vernon's hands fixing a broken blender, and the precise quality of his attention, and the way he laughed, and I thought, stop it. Then I cried, for real this time, for about 15 minutes. Not about Vernon. About everything. The divorce. The years the two failed attempts, and the grief I had folded away so neatly, and the wild cosmic joke of this pregnancy arriving exactly now. And the fact that my studio still had unpacked boxes because I couldn't quite bring myself to commit to the reality of this apartment, this life, this starting over. When I was finished, I washed my face. I made tea. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop and looked at the book cover project I was supposed to be finishing. I did not finish it. Instead, after a long moment, I opened my contacts. I scrolled to the B's. Buck, Vernon. I stared at his name for a while, then I closed my phone. Then I opened it again. Then I put it face down on the desk and made myself focus on the book cover. I told no one about the pregnancy for 2 weeks. This was partly practical. I was barely 6 weeks along, and the medical advice was cautious, and I had already experienced loss, and partly because telling people would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. If I said it out loud to another person, they would have feelings about it, and then I would have to manage their feelings on top of my own, and I was not at this particular moment in my life. Flush with spare emotional capacity. I told my mother on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the divorce. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Clayton, you are the most stubborn person I've ever known, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment." And then she cried a little. And then we talked for 2 hours, and it was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. She offered to come stay with me. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. We compromised on a visit in 6 weeks. I told my friend Petra, who screamed, actually screamed, a full-throated, joyful scream, and then immediately started sending me links to baby things, which was both overwhelming and deeply kind. I did not tell Derek. I would have to, eventually. I knew that. But Derek had moved with remarkable speed into his new life, and I was still standing in the wreckage of the old one. And I was not ready to bring him back into my orbit by inviting him to have opinions about my body and my choices. I had a lawyer. I would handle it through channels. I would be a responsible adult about it. I kept telling myself that. It was on a Friday night, 3 weeks after the divorce, that I sent the message to Vernon. I had had a glass of wine. One glass which my doctor had told me was fine in the early weeks with certain caveats, and which I had decided I was entitled to, and I was looking at a photo on my phone. It was from 4 years ago, before the wedding, a group photo from a camping trip that Petra had organized. Vernon was in it. He was standing at the edge of the group with his arm around my shoulders grinning at something off camera, and I was looking up at him instead of at the camera, and the expression on my face was so plainly. Obviously, I sent the message before I could fully think it through. "Hey, I know it's been a while. I've been thinking about you. Hope you're doing well." I put the phone down. I told myself it was a normal thing to do. Friends reach out to friends. This was not a significant act. This was just a message. My phone buzzed 45 minutes later. "Leighton, I think about you all the time. Are you okay?" I stared at that for a long time. "I think about you all the time." Not, "I'm doing great, thanks for reaching out." Not, "Hey, how's everything?" Just direct, like Vernon had always been when it mattered. "Not entirely," I typed. "It's been a complicated few months. I signed my divorce papers 3 weeks ago." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, I heard, "I'm so sorry. Can I call you?" I looked at that message. My heart was doing something irregular. "Yes," I typed. The phone rang 30 seconds later. Vernon's voice was the same. That was the first thing. It was exactly the same. Low and warm and unhurried, and it hit me somewhere behind the sternum in a way I didn't entirely know what to do with. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. And then, because it was Vernon, and because something about his voice dissolved whatever carefully constructed composure I was wearing, "I'm a complete mess, honestly." He laughed, soft. "Tell me." So I told him. I told him about Derek and the affair, and the second affair, and the slow, terrible process of deciding that we weren't going to save it. I told him about moving out, and the apartment, and the boxes I still hadn't unpacked. I told him about Gerald, the cinnamon gum lawyer, and signing my name on the dotted line. I did not tell him about the pregnancy. Not yet. It felt like too much, and we had just barely reopened the door of each other's lives, and I needed to know where the floor was before I handed him anything that heavy. He listened. He asked the right questions. He didn't offer empty reassurances or try to reframe my grief into something more manageable. He just stayed. Present, attentive, warm. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he said when I had finished. "When it was happening, I should have reached out. You couldn't have known. I knew enough. Petra told me things were hard before. I should have. Vernon." I stopped him. "You're here now." A pause. "Yeah," he said. "I am. We talked for 2 hours. I learned that he had left the job that had taken him away. The position had ended 2 years ago, and he had come back to the city, had in fact been back for 14 months. This information landed in me with a strange weight. He had been here, a mile away, maybe less, and we had existed in parallel, not touching. He was working as a structural engineer now, consulting on renovation projects. He had a dog named Biscuit, who apparently needed to be mentioned within the first 15 minutes of any conversation, or Vernon felt dishonest. He had been seeing someone for a while. He said it easily, without loading it, and it had ended about 6 months ago. Amicably. He seemed fine about it, and I believed him. When we finally hung up, it was past midnight. I lay on my bed in the dark and looked at the ceiling and tried to have a sensible internal conversation with myself about what I was feeling and what I intended to do about it. And the internal conversation went nowhere useful, and eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, there was a message waiting. Breakfast? I know a place that does the best eggs you've ever had. Saturday, 10 a.m., if you're free. I stared at that for 1 full minute. I'll be there, I wrote. The diner he chose was a narrow, homey place tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookshop, with red vinyl booths and a coffee so good it bordered on a moral experience. I got there first. I sat in a booth by the window and watched the street and tried to remember how to be a person who was simply having breakfast with a friend. No subtext, no wait. Just eggs, apparently excellent ones, and someone I had missed. Vernon was 2 minutes late, which was characteristic. He came through the door already scanning for me, found me immediately, and the smile that crossed his face it was something. Simple, immediate, like recognition. He was the same, and also more. The same jaw, the same way of moving through space. Deliberate, unhurried, but there were a few years on him now. Something settled in his face that hadn't been there before. He was wearing a gray Henley, and his hair was a little longer than I remembered. He looked good. He looked exactly like himself. He slid into the booth across from me and said, "You look different," which was a strange opening. Good different or bad different. He considered this seriously. "I don't know, just, you look like you've been through something." "I have been through something." "Yeah." He picked up the menu. "Tell me what you want to eat, and then tell me everything." The eggs were, as promised, exceptional. We sat in that booth for 3 hours. The breakfast crowd thinned, the lunch crowd started. Our server refilled our coffees with the comfortable frequency of someone who had decided we were there for the long haul and had made her peace with it. We talked about everything, the way we used to. That particular ease that had always existed between us. The one I had forgotten how specifically good it felt. It was still there, as though we had never let it go slack. We argued, gently, about a film we'd both seen. We swapped stories about the pandemic years, each of us discovering new textures of the other's experience during a time we'd spent largely alone. He told me about his sister's wedding last year, which he'd described as a beautiful disaster with obvious fondness. I told him about the book cover project that had made me briefly consider a career change. I did not tell him about the pregnancy. I told myself, not yet. One thing at a time. When we finally walked out into the late morning, the city bright and mild, the kind of day that makes you feel like possibility is a material thing you could reach out and touch. We stood on the sidewalk, and I thought, don't make it weird. "Sue, same time next week?" Vernon said. I looked at him. He had his hands in his pockets and was squinting slightly against the sun, and there was something so uncomplicated about the question, so simply hopeful, that it made something loosen in my chest. "Yeah," I said. "Same time next week." We started meeting every Saturday. This was established so easily that I barely noticed it becoming a fixture. One Saturday happened, and then the next, and by the third, it was simply a fact of my week. Vernon on Saturday morning. Eggs. Coffee. 3 hours that felt like 30 minutes. Between Saturdays, we texted. This also escalated without ceremony. First a few messages here and there, then longer threads, then the kind of running conversation that doesn't really end, just pauses and resumes. He sent me a photo of Biscuit. a honey-colored mutt of indeterminate breed, sleeping upside down on a couch with all four legs in the air. I sent him a mock-up of a cover I was working on that I thought was hideous. He told me, diplomatically, that it was reaching. I revised it. He told me it was better. He was right on both counts. He remembered things. He referenced things I'd mentioned 3 conversations ago. He asked follow-up questions. He paid attention in the way that some people are fundamentally built to pay attention, not as a performance, but as a condition of how he existed in the world. I was 8 weeks pregnant on our 4th Saturday. My clothes still fit. Nothing was showing. I had been to 1 prenatal appointment, alone, which had been fine, which had not made me cry at all, not even a little. I had a plan. The plan was, tell him soon. This week? Maybe today. I did not tell him that day. I told myself, next week. At 9 weeks, I was sick, not dramatically, mostly in the mornings, a queasy rolling that required me to eat a cracker before I got out of bed and to take my prenatal vitamins with significant negotiation. I made very sure not to be sick on Saturday mornings, which required some careful scheduling. At 10 weeks, I went for another appointment, and they showed me the heartbeat on the monitor. A flickering, rapid little signal, and I cried. Not the sad kind. Something entirely different, something large and involuntary. And I was embarrassed, and the technician handed me a tissue with the practiced grace of someone who has seen this approximately 10,000 times. That night, Vernon and I were texting, and he sent something that made me laugh out loud. A photo of Biscuit having somehow gotten his entire head stuck in a cardboard box, and I was sitting there laughing, genuinely for the first time in what felt like weeks, and I thought, I want to tell him in person. I want to see his face. The following Saturday, I sat across from him in our booth with the decision made. Our coffees were poured. The eggs were ordered. Vernon was telling me about a renovation project that was going sideways in a way that was, by his telling, genuinely fascinating from an engineering perspective, even as it was causing him daily headaches. I waited for a pause. "Vernon," I said. He stopped. Something in my tone, probably. He put down his coffee cup and looked at me with the full, undivided attention that was one of the things I had always loved about him. "What is it?" "I need to tell you something. I should have told you sooner. I don't know why I didn't exactly. That was a lie. I knew exactly why. I'm pregnant." The silence lasted about 3 seconds. His face went through something. I watched it happen, and he kept very still. "How far along?" 10.5 weeks. "Is it?" He stopped, reorganized. "From before the divorce?" "Yes." "Derek is." The word felt strange in my mouth. "The biological father." Vernon nodded slowly. His hands were around his coffee cup. His expression was careful in a way that I recognized as him processing, not shutting down. He was always careful when things were significant. How are you feeling about it?" "I'm still figuring that out," I said honestly. "I'm keeping it. That decision I made pretty quickly. But everything else is still." I made a gesture that was meant to convey enormous and in progress. "Have you told Derek?" "Not yet. I'm going to. Through my lawyer, probably, at least initially." I looked at my hands. "I know it's a lot." "Clayton." He waited until I looked up. "I'm glad you told me." He said it simply, with no performance around it, and it landed exactly the way simple, true things land. "I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." I wanted to say something and couldn't quite locate the words for it, so I just nodded. He reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his. One moment, warm and certain, and then he let go. And we went back to breakfast, and everything was the same, and nothing was the same. After that, things shifted. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, just a subtle change in the weight of things. Vernon now knowing this central fact about my life, which changed the color of everything around it. He started coming to the grocery store with me, which happened the first time by accident. We were texting when he happened to be near my neighborhood, and I happened to need groceries. And it seemed sensible, and then became a thing that just happened. He knew without being told that the smell of certain foods made the nausea worse, and he didn't make a fuss about it. just steered us away from the fish section with a casual rerouting that was so smooth I almost didn't notice. He came with me to my 12-week appointment. I had mentioned it in passing, something like, "I have my next appointment on Thursday," and he had said, "Do you want company?" SDS, and I had said, "You don't have to," and he had said, "I know." "Do you want company?" And I had said yes. He sat in the waiting room with Biscuit's harness in his lap. He had brought the dog because the appointment was near the park, and then he came into the exam room when the technician offered, and stood to one side with his arms crossed and his expression doing something complicated and careful, and when the heartbeat came up on the monitor, he exhaled sharply through his nose and didn't say anything, but he reached out and put his hand briefly on my shoulder. On the way out, Biscuit was thrilled to see me and attempted to climb me, which was not dignified for either of us but was good for the mood. "He's healthy?" Vernon said. "She," I said. "Or he?" "I don't know yet." "Right." He nodded. "They look good, measuring perfectly." "Good." He said it like a quiet decision. "Good." We walked to the park. Biscuit ran. We sat on a bench in the mild afternoon, and Vernon told me about a conversation he'd had with his engineer colleague that had made him genuinely furious for 20 minutes and then genuinely impressed. And I listened and watched the dog barrel through a pile of leaves, and something about the whole scene, the ordinary ease of it, the particular warmth, made me feel for the first time in a while genuinely all right. "Vernon," I said, while he was mid-sentence. He stopped. "Yeah? I'm really glad you're back in my life." He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the dog. Then he turned and looked at me, and there was something in his face that I noticed and immediately told myself to be sensible about. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." I told Derek in week 13, through my lawyer, as planned, with a letter that was formal and civilized and contained, at Gerald's advice, only the essential information. Derek's response, routed back through his lawyer, was, I had expected hurt or anger or some version of the Derek I had known, dramatic and slightly self-centered. What I got instead was a careful message that was clearly drafted with legal assistance, expressing that he wished me well, that he would not be seeking parental rights, that any financial matters should be routed through the appropriate channels. I sat with that for a few days. The relief was significant and genuine. The grief was also real. Not grief for Derek exactly, but grief for the version of our life that had included, however briefly, the shared dream of a family. That version was fully gone now. I let myself feel that, and then I put it down, and I moved forward. I was on my own with this. On my own with Petra, who had already bought approximately $140,000 worth of items in various shades of yellow. On my own with my mother, who had started sending weekly care packages. On my own with Vernon. Not that Vernon was mine. I was careful about that framing. He was my friend. He was back in my life as my friend, and that was a good and true and valuable thing, and I was not going to wreck it by wanting it to be something else. I had excellent conversations with myself about this. They were not always convincing. The thing about spending every Saturday with someone and texting them most days, and having them come to your medical appointments and your grocery runs and your occasional bad evenings when the nausea was particularly unpleasant, and you sent a message that said, having a rough night, see, and they showed up 20 minutes later with a variety of crackers and a willingness to watch whatever you wanted on television. The thing about all of that is that it becomes very difficult to maintain the fiction that it's simply friendship. Not that it wasn't friendship, it was friendship. It was also something else, something that existed alongside the friendship without negating it, like a frequency playing under the audible range. I noticed it in specific moments. I noticed it when Vernon laughed. Really laughed, the full one that he saved for things that genuinely got him, head tilting back slightly, eyes crinkling. I noticed it when he was focused on something, the same concentrated patience I had first seen in a kitchen over a broken blender. I noticed it when he said my name in the particular way he had, with a weight to it, like it was worth saying. I noticed it when at 16 weeks I started visibly showing, and the first time he saw me after that. I had been nervous irrationally about the physical change. He looked at me and said, "You look beautiful," without any ceremony, and then went back to what he was saying, as if this was not a significant thing to have said, as if it were simply accurate. I did not say anything about it. I went home and stood in front of the mirror for a while, looking at my changed shape, and thought, this is not the time. I was pregnant. I was newly divorced. I was a man who was going to be a single parent in about 5 months. Vernon was my friend. The timing was wrong. The situation was complicated, and the last thing either of us needed was for me to introduce a romantic element into the only functional relationship I currently had. These were all sensible thoughts. I believed all of them. They did not actually help. It was a Thursday in my 19th week. A storm had come in that afternoon, not the gentle kind, but the serious kind. The kind that makes you feel the city's infrastructure is a suggestion rather than a guarantee, with thunder that seemed to land physically and lightning that lit the windows in long, flat sheets. I had been having a difficult day already. Nothing specific, the sum of everything, the weight of the approaching reality, a hormonal tidal shift that left me feeling raw and unmoored. I had stared at a book cover design for 4 hours and done nothing useful with it. I had eaten half a bowl of pasta and then couldn't face the rest. The storm made the apartment feel smaller. At 8 in the evening, my phone buzzed. Checking in. How are you doing in this weather? I looked at that message for a moment. The apartment was very quiet except for the storm. Honestly, not great. It's been a hard day. I'm outside. I stared at that. What? I was in the neighborhood. Didn't want to just show up, but also didn't want to go home without checking. Is it okay if I come up? I should have felt something more complicated about the fact that he had been in the neighborhood on a Thursday in a thunderstorm. I didn't. I just felt something in my chest release. Doors open, I typed. He came up carrying a paper bag, dumplings from the place 2 blocks over, which had become established as the definitive comfort food in our joint opinion over the course of the last several months. And he was damp from the rain-shaking water from his jacket, and Biscuit appeared from behind him, equally damp and infinitely more cheerful about it. You didn't have to, I said. I know. He set the bag on the counter and looked at me the way he did when he was taking a real assessment of how someone was doing. What happened? Nothing specific. Unjust. I sat down on the couch. I'm exhausted, not physically, just tired of carrying it, he said. I looked at him. Yeah, I said, exactly that. He put the dumplings in bowls and brought them over. He sat next to me on the couch. Biscuit arranged himself across both our feet, which was presumptuous but warm. We ate, and the storm went on outside, and Vernon talked. Not about anything significant, just stories low and easy filling the space in the way that some people know how to do. Taking the pressure off without drawing attention to the fact that they're doing it. His colleague's ongoing renovation disaster had escalated. His sister had called in a panic about a plumbing issue that turned out to be a very determined squirrel. Biscuit had stolen an entire sandwich from an unattended picnic table earlier in the week with the efficiency of a professional operative. I ate my dumplings. The storm knocked at the windows. The tight, exhausted place in my chest slowly, gradually loosened. At some point, without planning it, I leaned against him, shoulder to shoulder, then shoulder to chest, his arm coming around me, not making anything of it, just the way 2 people settle when the space between them has become unnecessary. Better? He said after a while. Yeah, I said. Better. We stayed like that for a long time, watching something on television that neither of us was really following while the storm spent itself outside and the city went on. And the baby moved for the first time, a fluttery, impossible sensation like something turning over very gently inside me, and I went still. What? Vernon said. She's moving. I grabbed his free hand, without thinking, just grabbed it, and pressed it against the side of my abdomen where the sensation was. Wait. He went perfectly still. His hand was very warm through the fabric of my shirt. We both waited. And then it happened again, that soft, improbable flutter, and Vernon made a sound that I had never heard from him before. Something involuntary, barely audible, like the sound a person makes when they witness something they didn't know they were waiting for. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. His hand stayed where I had put it, warm and still. We sat there, in the aftermath of the storm, while my daughter moved inside me, and Vernon's hand on my side felt like something with a name I wasn't ready to say yet. When he finally left that night, late, standing in my doorway with Biscuit on the leash, he looked at me for a moment that lasted a beat longer than leave taking usually requires. "Get some sleep," he said. "I will." "And Clayton?" "Yeah?" He shook his head slightly. "Nothing. Good night." I watched him go down the stairs, and then I closed the door, and I stood in my hallway for a while. 22 weeks. My belly was significant now. Large enough that strangers in the grocery store occasionally commented on it. Large enough that sleeping required a careful arrangement of pillows. Large enough that it had become the first thing you noticed about me when I walked into a room. Petra had thrown a small gathering, not a formal shower, just a group of people who loved me in one apartment with food and entirely too many blankets as gifts. Vernon came. He stood in the corner with a glass of sparkling water and talked to my mother, who had driven in for the weekend, for 45 minutes. My mother came to find me afterward with an expression that I recognized. "He's wonderful," she said. "He's my friend." She gave me the look. The one that said, "I have known you since before you could speak, and I know exactly what your face is doing, and you are not fooling anyone, least of all yourself. Mom. I'm just saying. Mom." She went back to talking to Petra, and I went back to opening blankets, and I did not think about Vernon at the other end of the room. That was another lie. The problem, the specific, concrete problem, was this. I was in love with Vernon Buck. Had been, in some form, since that kitchen at that party with the broken blender. Had managed it carefully for years, keeping it in a compartment, and then marrying someone else, and then losing touch. And now he was back, and the compartment was not as solid as I had previously understood it to be, and everything about the current situation made action impossible. Here was my thinking, laid out. I was 5 months pregnant. My divorce had been finalized less than 4 months ago. Vernon had come back into my life at the exact moment it was in maximum disarray, and he had been a friend, a good, reliable, genuine friend. And that was what this was. That was what he meant for it to be, and there was no version of me suddenly declaring feelings that didn't end with me making a spectacular mess of the only real relationship I had rebuilt. He was straight. That was the other thing. I was almost certain. We had never discussed it directly, but Vernon had always dated women, had been seeing a woman as recently as 6 months ago, and I had never gotten any signal, any clear signal, that suggested otherwise. I was excellent at telling myself that the looks didn't mean anything and the hand on the couch didn't mean anything, and the fact that he had been in the neighborhood on a Thursday in a thunderstorm definitely didn't mean anything. I was building a family. I was building a life. I needed the ground to be stable, so I stayed in my compartment. I was friendly and warm and present, and none of the other things. Vernon, for his part, he was Vernon. He was exactly the same, which was the problem, because Vernon being exactly himself was the thing that had been dismantling my resolve since the beginning. At 24 weeks, I had a scare. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had gone to my regular appointment, and the midwife had found something she wanted to look at more closely, a concern about the position of the placenta, and I had been sent to the hospital for a more detailed scan, and the next 4 hours were the longest I had experienced in recent memory. I called Petra first, because she was closest. She couldn't leave work immediately, but would come as soon as she could. I called my mother, who was 3 hours away, and immediately began preparing to drive. I sat in the hospital waiting room with my hands in my lap and my heart in my throat and tried to focus on breathing. My phone buzzed. "Vernon, hey, just thinking about you. How's the appointment going?" I stared at that for a moment. Then I typed, "At the hospital. Everything is probably fine, but I'm having an extra scan. It's okay, just waiting." The response came in seconds. "Which hospital?" "Vernon, you don't need to." "Which hospital?" I told him. He was there in 22 minutes. He came through the waiting room door still wearing his work jacket, keys in hand, slightly out of breath from what had clearly been a faster walk than his usual pace. He scanned the room, found me, and came directly over and sat down next to me without saying anything. And I was extremely glad that I was already looking at the floor when he arrived, because my face was doing several things I would not have been able to manage with someone watching. "Hi," he said. "You didn't have to come," I said. "I know." He leaned back in the chair. "Tell me what they said," I told him. The concern about the placenta, marginal previa possibly, but too early to be certain, requiring monitoring. The additional scan. The waiting. He nodded. He was calm, in the way that calm people are calm, not performing it, not suppressing anything, just actually steady. It was one of the things about him that had always grounded me. We waited. He made sure I ate the granola bar from his jacket pocket, which I hadn't known was there. He did not fill the silence with anxious chatter, but was not silent in a way that felt tense. He just was there. The scan came back. The concern had been, as the radiologist put it, inconclusive, worth watching but not immediately alarming. I needed to come back in 3 weeks. But for now, the baby was fine. Everything that needed to be fine was fine. I sat in the consultation room after the radiologist left and breathed. Vernon was in the waiting room. I went out to find him and told him the news, and he exhaled. A long, slow exhale, and nodded, and then, before I fully understood what was happening, he put his arms around me and held me. I froze for a half second. Then I didn't. I put my face against his shoulder and held on, and he held back, and I thought very distinctly, I am never going to be able to go back in the compartment. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We stood there for a moment that was longer than a reflex and shorter than an announcement, and then we separated, and his hand stayed on my arm for a second afterward, and then that too. "Come on," he said. "I'll take you home." It was a Sunday, not our Saturday, the day after, when it happened. I had been restless all day. The hospital scare, even resolved, had left a residue of anxiety that I couldn't quite shake, and the apartment felt tight, and I had been going in circles in my own head all afternoon. Vernon had texted mid-afternoon to check in, and somehow, instead of the exchange staying textual, I had said, "See, can you come over?" I don't know why, He had said yes, he came over. He brought nothing this time, which was different. He came in his weekend clothes and sat across from me in the living room, and I sat curled on the couch with my tea, and we talked about the scan and about the placenta and about the next appointment. And I started to feel better, more anchored, and that was when it happened. He was talking about something, his sister, I think, a follow-up about the plumbing squirrel, and I was watching him, and something in me simply gave out. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. The compartment just gave way, quietly, like a door that had been held shut too long, finally releasing from the latch. "I need to tell you something," I said. He stopped mid-sentence. The look he gave me, careful, open, was the same one he always gave me when something mattered. "Okay," he said. I looked at my tea. I've been managing something for a while. Something I haven't said, and I think I need to say it, because not saying it is, I stopped. It's getting harder to manage. The room was very quiet. "I'm in love with you," I said. "I think I have been for a long time, and I know the timing is." I made a gesture at myself, at my visible pregnancy, at the general chaos of my current life. "I know it's a lot. I know you probably didn't see this coming, and I know you might not." I stopped again. I just needed to say it, because not saying it was. I shook my head. "I'm sorry. I know this is Clayton." The way he said my name made me stop. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, but there was something in it, something that made me stay very still. "How long?" he said. I blinked. "What? How long?" His voice was even. "Careful. How long have you felt that way?" I looked at him. "A long time," I said. The broken blender. Something happened to his face. He looked away for a moment, and I watched his jaw work slightly, and then he looked back at me. "I drove 3 hours to your wedding," he said. "I stood in the second row and watched you marry someone else and told myself it was fine." He paused. "It was not fine. The room was completely silent. Vernon. I moved away, he said, because I thought it would be better, easier, to have some distance. And then I came back because, he stopped, because I couldn't, because the city felt wrong without you in it. He said it plainly, without drama. I know it sounds. It doesn't, I said. He looked at me. It doesn't sound like anything, I said. It sounds exactly like what it is. He stood up. I thought, for one panicked second, that he was leaving. He didn't leave. He came around the coffee table and sat next to me on the couch, close, the way he'd sat on the night of the storm, and turned to face me. I've thought about this moment, he said. Different versions of it, different contexts. A small, complicated smile. This was not a context I had considered. I laughed, unexpectedly. 5 months pregnant with my ex-husband's baby, 2 months after a divorce, was not how I planned to do this either. No, he was looking at me in that direct way of his. Clayton, I need you to hear what I'm saying. I'm listening. I love you, he said. I have loved you for longer than is easy to admit. And the baby. He paused, chose his words. The baby doesn't complicate it for me. I want to be clear about that. Something closed over in my throat. You can't just, Vernon, you can't just say that like, I know what I'm saying. It's a huge thing too. I know what it is. Steady, unhurried, the way he had always been when it mattered. I'm not speaking carelessly. I mean it. I was looking at him and I was a mess. I could feel it, the tidal hormonal inconvenience of being pregnant, the tears that were happening against my express wishes. And he reached up and very carefully wiped one away with his thumb, and his hand stayed against my face and I leaned into it. I'm terrified, I said. It felt important to say. Yeah, he said. Me too, that seems right. I laughed again, wetly. He was looking at me with the expression I had been telling myself meant nothing for 6 months, and it was not nothing. It had never been nothing. He kissed me slowly, carefully, the way he did everything, as though this moment was worth the full weight of his attention. I had imagined this at various points, had strictly forbidden myself from imagining it, had imagined it anyway. It was better. It was warmer. It was his particular quality of patience applied to something entirely different, and it undid me completely. When he pulled back, we were both very quiet. Hi, I said, which was ridiculous. Hi, he said, which was not ridiculous at all. It was exactly right. We were sensible about it. This, I think, surprised both of us. Or perhaps it didn't, because in retrospect, the sensibility was characteristic of Vernon and I had apparently absorbed it by proximity. We agreed on some things. That we were not going to rush, that we were not going to pretend the complicating factors didn't exist. That we were going to let this be what it actually was, rather than what we might want it to be at maximum speed. We held to this, more or less. There were moments that tested it. The first time he stayed over, we did not mean it to happen. He had come for dinner. I was in my 27th week, and cooking for myself was becoming a logistical adventure. And we had eaten and talked, and then it was late, and the conversation had not run out. And eventually, matter-of-factly, he had said, "Can I stay?" And I had said yes. And it had been. It had been quiet and close and right in a way that made me understand what had been missing for a long time. He slept beside me with his hand resting against my side, warm and still, and I lay awake for a while not because anything was wrong, but because I wanted to be present for it. He stayed over more often after that, always asking, always matter-of-fact about it. He brought a few things gradually, not marking territory, just practical logistics, a toothbrush, a change of clothes. Biscuit adapted to my apartment, with the ease of a creature who had decided that any space Vernon occupied was definitively good. My mother came for a weekend and met him in this new context. She was so studiously unsurprised that it was almost suspicious. She pulled me aside on Sunday morning while Vernon was making coffee. He had taken over the coffee, which I was grateful for because my attempts had been inconsistent, and said, quietly, "He looks at you like you're the only thing in the room." "Mom? I'm not interfering," she said. "I'm observing. I'm allowed to observe." She left on Sunday evening, From the doorway, she hugged Vernon goodbye with an ease that suggested she had decided he was allowed. In my 30th week, I did something I had been thinking about for a while. I unpacked the boxes in the studio. I didn't do it alone. Vernon was there. On a Saturday afternoon, he had shown up with coffee and an expression that suggested he had decided it was time, and we unpacked together. He handed me things and I put them where they went, and he didn't comment on the ones that were from the old house, the ones that had Derek's fingerprints on them in some metaphorical sense. And he didn't make any suggestions about what the room should be, just helped me put things where I wanted them. By the end of the afternoon, the boxes were gone, and the studio was a studio. There was light from the window that I had been blocking with boxes. There was space to work. There was a chair in the corner that Vernon had sat in while we figured out where the easel should go, and which he claimed, from that point forward, as his reading chair for when I was painting. I painted for the first time in months that evening. Just a small thing, color study, nothing significant. Vernon read in his chair with Biscuit at his feet, and the radiator knocked and hissed its comforting pattern, and the light went golden and then gray, and I painted, and it felt like something returning. The baby shower Petra threw in week 32 was a slightly bigger affair than I had expected. Petra operated on a scale. This was established law. The apartment was full of people who loved me, and the table was covered in food, and there were decorations that had clearly involved significant advance planning, and I sat in the middle of it and felt, unexpectedly, profoundly held. Vernon arrived with a large, carefully wrapped gift that he set to the side with the others, and then came to stand near me, not attached, not possessive, just nearby. In the particular way he had of being nearby. Someone asked, one of Petra's friends who didn't know the full story, "Is this your partner?" Vernon looked at me briefly. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. Something shifted in Vernon's expression. Small, private, a thing he didn't broadcast. He looked back at Petra's friend and said, "Yeah, that's right." Later, after most people had left and Petra was bustling through the cleanup, Vernon came and sat beside me while I opened the last few gifts. He was looking at the items as I unwrapped them. The soft, impractical, wonderful things people buy for babies, and his expression was quiet and open in the way it got when he was feeling something he wasn't trying to manage. "You okay?" I asked. He looked at me. "Yeah," he said, "more than." The countdown became real in week 35. The nesting instinct that everyone had warned me about hit with unexpected force. I reorganized things. I reorganized them again. I made lists. I consulted the lists. I had opinions about which receiving blanket belonged, where that I would not have been able to justify rationally but felt, at the time, extremely important. Vernon was patient with this in the way that he was patient with most things, genuinely, without martyrdom. He helped me rearrange the second bedroom, which was now a proper nursery, the boxes long gone, painted a soft, warm yellow that I had agonized over for a week. He assembled furniture with the same focused patience he brought to engineering problems, consulting the instructions, setting aside the pieces in order, not rushing. He built the crib, and then stood back and looked at it, and I watched him do that, and I thought about the fact that this man, this particular, specific man, had come back into my life at the exact moment that was both the worst and the best possible moment, and had been from the start exactly what I needed without ever making a performance of it. "It looks good," I said. "It does," he agreed. I went and stood next to him, and he put his arm around me, and we stood there looking at the finished crib in the yellow room. "I should tell you something," I said. "Okay. I'm not scared anymore. Or, I am, but it's the right kind of scared. The kind that makes sense to be." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah? Yeah?" I leaned against him. I think I'm ready." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "You've been ready," he said. "You just needed the room to know it." In week 37, I had the conversation with my mother that I had been circling around. She had come to stay for the last stretch. This had been established as non-negotiable by her, and I had not seriously argued. And we were sitting in the kitchen one morning while Vernon was at work. And she said, What are you going to tell her about her father? I had thought about this a great deal. The truth, I said, when she's old enough to understand the truth. That her biological father and I weren't right for each other. That she was wanted. That she has people who love her. I paused. And that the person who showed up and stayed, that's the person who matters. My mother looked at me for a long moment. You're going to be a wonderful father, she said. I didn't trust my voice for a second. So is he, she added, with a precision that she probably thought was subtle. Mom, I'm just saying. In week 38, Vernon asked if he could be in the delivery room. We were in bed. The mornings had become, by accretion, a shared domestic ritual, coffee and conversation in the reliable light of my bedroom, and he asked it with the same directness he brought to everything important. I want to be there, he said, if you want that, if it's… Yes, I said, obviously yes. He nodded. He looked at the window for a moment, then back at me. I'm nervous, he said. I want you to know that. I'm nervous and I don't know exactly what I'm doing. Neither do I. I know, but you've been… He paused. You've been building this whole thing. You've been doing all of this. And I want to. He seemed to be searching for exactly the right words, which was unusual for him. I want to be there all the way, not the easy parts, all of it. I looked at him in the morning light and thought, this is the person, not the lightning bolt discovery. I had known it for a long time. But the recognition, in this moment, in the ordinary morning, of the particular rightness of it. The person who shows up. The person who stays. All of it, I said. Yeah. Labor was 31 hours. I will not detail all of them because several hours were not cinematic or romantic in any way and are mine to keep. But this is what I remember. I remember Vernon's hand, which I held through most of it and which I probably squeezed too hard at points and which he never flinched from. I remember the way he talked me through the worst of it. Low and steady and close, not offering solutions or reassurances that wouldn't have meant anything, just his voice, just, I'm here. You're doing it. I'm right here. See, I remember the moment, the exact moment. After an hour that had required everything I had when the room changed, when the sound in it changed, and there was suddenly another sound. And I heard it, and couldn't speak for several seconds. She was here. She was here, and she was perfect and indignant about it, and they put her on my chest and I looked at her face, scrunched and furious and entirely herself. Already entirely herself, and I have no way to describe what that was. There are no words that survive the translation. I only know that I was completely remade in that moment, and I have never been the same since. I looked up at Vernon. He was not composed. He had been composed for 31 hours, and he was not composed anymore, and he was not trying to be, and there were tears on his face, and he wasn't wiping them. And he was looking at her, and then at me, and then at her, and when he finally looked at me fully, I saw everything I needed to see. Hi, he said to her, quiet, as though he didn't want to startle her. She was not startled by anything. She was outraged, then less outraged, then briefly curious. Then she settled against me and her eyes, unfocused and dark, moved toward the sound of his voice, and Vernon made a sound that I am keeping. Can I? He said. Yes, I said. He held her for the first time, with the same focused patience he brought to everything, very still, looking at her face with the kind of attention he saved for things that were important. She was about 7 minutes old. She looked back at him with the uncertain finding gaze of someone very new to the project of existence. Hi, he said again. I'm Vernon. I'm going to be here. He meant it in every possible way. She is 2 months old now. Her name is Nell, Eleanor, on paper, but Nell from the beginning, because the moment I said it in the hospital, it fit her and nothing else has since. She has my mouth and a scowl that is entirely her own, and an interest in ceiling fans that I find philosophically interesting. Biscuit is devoted to her in a watchful, anxious way that suggests he has decided she is his personal responsibility. He relocates wherever she relocates. He is very concerned whenever she cries. Vernon thinks this is extremely funny. I think it is extremely funny and also a little touching. Vernon is here most mornings. He is here most evenings. There was a conversation around the time Nell was 6 weeks old that was not a long or complicated conversation. We are both of us. People who prefer directness when it matters, about what the current arrangement actually was and what we wanted it to be. The conversation ended with him going to his apartment, getting biscuit, getting a bag, and coming back, and that has been the arrangement since. This is not a love story about two people who found each other instantly and knew immediately and moved from there in a straight line. This is a love story about the longer kind. About two people who found each other and fumbled it and lost each other, and found each other again at the worst and best possible moment, and had the particular courage it requires to take something true seriously when the timing is imperfect and the circumstances are complicated, and the sensible thing would be to wait for some theoretical future when everything is tidier. There is no such future. There is only now, which is Nell in the morning light, examining a ceiling fan with total dedication, while Biscuit monitors the situation from the floor. Vernon in the kitchen, coffee made correctly, making the sounds of a person who has decided that this particular kitchen is where he lives. The yellow nursery and the studio unpacked, and the radiator with its reliable knock and hiss. My divorce papers are in a file somewhere in a drawer. I signed them the same day I found out I was pregnant. Those two things happened on the same afternoon, and both of them, in different ways, were endings that became the conditions for something else, for Nell, for Vernon, for the particular shape this life has taken. I do not think endings are always only endings. Sometimes they are the moment before the thing you were actually waiting for, and you didn't know you were waiting, and then it arrives. And you understand that the timing was always this. Not in spite of the difficulty, but because of it. The difficulty, the very thing that made you ready. I look at Vernon across the kitchen. He is reading something on his phone, holding his coffee, having the particular look he gets when something he's reading has genuinely interested him. He looks up and finds me looking and gives me the direct, uncomplicated smile that has been my favorite thing in the world since a kitchen and a broken blender and a party where we stayed 4 hours past when we meant to leave. "What?" he says. "Nothing," I say. "Everything's good." He holds my gaze for a moment. Then he nods, that small, certain nod of his, the one that means, yes, it is. Nell makes a sound from her bouncer that is demanding and perfectly articulate. We both look at her. "Your turn," Vernon says. "It's definitely your turn," I say. He is already moving toward her. This is how it is. This is what we've built. Not carefully, not perfectly, not according to any plan I would have drawn before the ink dried on Gerald's conference table and the world rearranged itself without asking my permission. But this, exactly. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, make sure to join our Patreon. Link is in the description. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.